The confession of the captured soldier, a man named Corporal Thomas Dawkins, had been a significant turning point in the case. It had transformed our theories into hard facts and had given us a clear, if perilous, path forward. The interrogation, however, was not merely a means to an end for Holmes. It was a window into the soul of the Crimson Shadow, a glimpse into the raw, festering wound of injustice that lay at the heart of the conspiracy. We sat in the cold, sterile environment of a Scotland Yard office, a stark contrast to the familiar, chaotic comfort of our Baker Street rooms. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigar smoke and desperation. Inspector Lestrade, buoyed by the success of our recent capture, was in a state of high excitement, his usual skepticism replaced by a bustling, self-important energy. He saw the case as a straightforward matter of rounding up a gang of criminals, a feather in his professional cap. But Holmes, as always, saw the deeper, more complex currents beneath the surface. He sat in a hard-backed chair, his fingers steepled before him, his gaze distant and contemplative. He was not thinking about the mechanics of the arrest, but about the man we had just left in the interrogation room, a man broken not by guilt, but by a lifetime of righteous anger. "It is a tragedy, Watson," he murmured, his voice low and resonant. "A tragedy of wasted loyalty and perverted justice. That man, Corporal Dawkins, is not a common thug. He's a soldier, a man who was willing to lay down his life for his country, and his country, in the form of its officers, betrayed him. Can we be surprised that he has sought his own form of justice, however misguided?" "But they are murderers, Holmes," I countered, my own sense of justice less inclined to philosophical nuance. "They have kidnapped Lord Vance, and they were planning to kill Major Fairfield. Whatever their grievances, their methods are those of criminals." "Of course they are," Holmes agreed, his eyes meeting mine. "And they must be stopped. But to understand the criminal, Watson, one must first understand the man. To catch the serpent, one must first understand the nature of its venom. The venom that drives the Crimson Shadow is not simple greed or malice. It is a burning, all-consuming sense of betrayal. And that is a far more potent and dangerous poison." Our conversation was interrupted by the return of Lestrade, his face flushed with a mixture of triumph and frustration. "Well, he's given us the location of the meeting," he announced, slapping a piece of paper down on the table. "A derelict warehouse by the Thames, the old Blackwall Wharf. They're meeting tomorrow night to plan the final details of the attack on Fairfield." He paused, his brow furrowing. "But he won't give us anything more. He claims he doesn't know where Vance is being held. Says only the Colonel knows that. He's loyal to the last, the stubborn fool." "He's not a fool, Inspector," Holmes said, his voice sharp. "He is a soldier, and his loyalty, however misplaced, is a quality you would do well to respect. It is the very quality that men like Moran prey upon." Holmes took the piece of paper and studied it, his mind already formulating a plan. "Blackwall Wharf, a fitting location for a gathering of shadows. Isolated, decaying, a place where the ghosts of London's industrial past still linger. It is the perfect place for an ambush." "My thoughts exactly, Holmes," Lestrade said, puffing out his chest. "I'll have a cordon of men around the place by nightfall. We'll catch the whole bloody lot of them in one fell swoop." Holmes shook his head, a faint, pitying smile on his lips. "Your methods, Inspector, are as subtle as a charging rhinoceros. If your men are seen, the society will scatter like startled pigeons, and Moran will simply melt away into the fog. No, we must be more cunning. We must be the serpent, not the bulldog. He outlined his plan, a daring and dangerous proposal that once again pushed the boundaries of conventional police work. He proposed that he and I would infiltrate the warehouse before the meeting began. We would hide, observe, and listen. We would learn the full scope of their plans, the identities of the other members, and, most importantly, the location where Lord Vance was being held. Lestrade and his men would wait in the wings, ready to storm the warehouse on his signal. Lestrade was, as expected, aghast at the idea. "Infiltrate the meeting? Are you mad, Holmes? These are desperate, dangerous men. They'll kill you without a second thought." "I am well aware of the risks, Inspector," Holmes replied, his voice calm and steady. "But it is a risk we must take. We need to know where Vance is. He is the only living witness who can testify against Moran. Without him, our case is significantly weaker. Moran could claim he was a victim, a prisoner of the society, not its leader. We must have Vance, and this is the only way to find him." His logic was undeniable, his courage unnerving. Lestrade, after much grumbling and dire warnings, reluctantly agreed. He was a man who, for all his bluster, knew when he was out of his depth. He recognized that this was a game that required a level of finesse and daring that was beyond the reach of ordinary police methods. The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Holmes, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the London underworld, was able to procure detailed plans of the Blackwall Wharf warehouse. He studied them intently, memorizing every corridor, every staircase, every potential hiding place and escape route. He also spent a considerable amount of time in his small makeshift laboratory, surrounded by the acrid fumes of his chemical experiments. He was preparing a few of his signature surprises, as he called them. Small, ingenious devices designed to create diversions and aid in our escape, should things go wrong. As evening approached, a sense of quiet anticipation settled over our Baker Street rooms. The die was cast, the plan was in motion, and there was nothing left to do but to see it through. I confess my own nerves were on edge. The thought of being hidden in a room full of desperate and armed men, with only Holmes's wits and my own service revolver to protect us, was a sobering one. Holmes, however, seemed to be in his element. He was calm, focused, and filled with a quiet, almost joyful intensity. He was an artist preparing for his masterpiece, a grand performance in the theater of crime. "Courage, Watson," he said, noticing my unease. "The greatest rewards are always found on the far side of the greatest risks. Tonight we will not just be observers of the drama. We will be actors on its stage. And I, for one, am eager to play my part." We dressed in dark, unobtrusive clothing, and under the cover of a moonless, starless night, we made our way to the desolate, windswept landscape of the London Docklands. The area was a maze of narrow, cobbled streets, towering warehouses, and the skeletal silhouettes of cranes against the night sky. The air was thick with the smell of salt, tar, and the cold, damp breath of the river. The Blackwall Wharf warehouse was a monstrous, decaying hulk of a building, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the dark, swirling waters of the Thames. It was a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, a perfect haunt for a society of ghosts. We approached with caution, sticking to the shadows, our senses on high alert. As we drew closer, we could see that Lestrade had, for once, followed Holmes's instructions to the letter. There were no uniformed officers in sight, only the occasional flicker of movement in a darkened doorway or alleyway, the subtle presence of the plain-clothes men who formed our safety net. Holmes led me to a small, rusted side door, its lock long since broken. We slipped inside, the darkness of the warehouse enveloping us like a shroud. The air was cold and still, thick with the dust of ages. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the river against the wharf outside. Using a small hooded lantern, Holmes navigated us through the cavernous, cluttered space. We made our way to a small elevated office that overlooked the main floor of the warehouse. It was the perfect vantage point, a place where we could see and hear everything without being seen. We settled in for another tense, nerve-wracking wait. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The silence of the warehouse was almost as unnerving as the prospect of the violence to come. And then they began to arrive. One by one, they slipped into the warehouse, silent, shadowy figures emerging from the London night. They were men of all ages, but they shared a common look, a hardness in their eyes, a weariness in their posture, the unmistakable bearing of men who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. They gathered on the main floor below us, their low, murmuring voices echoing in the vast, empty space. There were about a dozen of them in all, a small but determined army of the dispossessed. And then he appeared. The man they called the Colonel. He was not what I had expected. I had pictured a brute, a thug, a man whose villainy was etched on his face. But the man who entered the warehouse was tall, handsome, and impeccably dressed. He moved with an air of aristocratic grace and authority, his face a mask of cool, intelligent confidence. It was Colonel Sebastian Moran, and he was every bit as formidable as Holmes had described. He commanded the room without raising his voice, his presence alone enough to silence the murmuring of his men. He stood before them, a charismatic and compelling figure, his voice ringing with a righteous fury that was both terrifying and strangely seductive. "Brothers," he began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that filled the cavernous space. "The time is at hand. For 20 years, we have lived with the shame of their betrayal. For 20 years, we have carried the burden of their lies. But no more. The time for justice has come." He spoke of their shared grievance, of the honor that had been stolen from them, of the righteous vengeance that was their due. He was a master orator, a demagogue who knew how to play on the emotions of his audience, to stoke the fires of their anger and their grief. "Vance is gone," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "The first of the traitors has paid his price, and now we turn our attention to the next. Major Jonathan Fairfield, a man who has grown fat and prosperous on our stolen pay, a man who has lived a life of luxury while we have struggled in poverty and shame." He outlined his plan for the attack on Fairfield's house, a detailed and ruthless strategy that left no room for error. It was a plan for an execution, pure and simple. And then he came to the part we had been waiting for, "But what of Vance?" one of the men called out. "He is still alive, is he not? What is to be done with him?" A cruel smile played on Morin's lips. "Vance is our trophy," he said, his voice dripping with a cold, sadistic pleasure. "He is our proof to the world of the justice of our cause. He is being held in a safe place, a place where he can reflect on his sins. And when we have dealt with Fairfield, we will deal with him. We will stage a final public tribunal. We will make him confess his crimes before the world, and then we will deliver the sentence that he has so long deserved." He paused, savoring the moment. "He is being held at the old abandoned chapel at St. Giles' Rookery, a fitting place for a man to pray for his soul." Holmes and I exchanged a look. We had it, the final piece of the puzzle, the location of Lord Vance. But our triumph was short-lived. As Morin finished his speech, a sudden noise from the back of the warehouse shattered the tense silence. A loose board, dislodged by one of Lestrade's over-eager men, clattered to the floor. The effect was instantaneous. The men of the Crimson Shadow, their senses honed by years of military training, were on high alert. Morin's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the darkness, his hand reaching inside his coat. "We have company," he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Search the warehouse. Find them." Our hiding place was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. The hunters had become the hunted. The carefully constructed plan had fallen apart, and we were now in a desperate fight for our lives. The interrogation was over, and the battle was about to begin.